Hello and welcome back to ITWeb TV at Security Summit 2024. I'm joined now by Dwain Muller, who is the Chief Operating Officer from Snode Technologies. Snode are our sponsors and friends helping us with the booth today. Dwain, welcome.
Thank you, Adrian. Thanks for having me.
Cool, pleasure. So let's just start off, easy question just to kind of get things going. Who are you?
Good question, difficult one.
No, okay, not deep psychological things. But who are you? Was Snode? Tell us a bit more. Give us that kind of elevator pitch intro.
Awesome. So, Dwain Muller, Chief Operating Officer from Snode Technology. I'm actually born and raised in professional services, so had the privilege to be part of multiple disciplines. And a good 4 or 5 years ago, I joined Snode Technology and really getting my hands dirty on solving industry problems. I'm leading a brilliant team, 50 odd cyber people, not just solving cyber problems, but then also cyber issues for our clientele.
Okay. Okay, cool. So then, I know there's a TV show that I used to watch as a kid, and it was like the super smart people, and it's called Mastermind.
Yeah.
And there's the presenter, and he would kind of have the general knowledge, and then your specialist subject. So your specialist subject, Dwain Muller, for this time of 20 minutes is continuous threat exposure management.
Yeah.
But let's delve deeper into that. So can you explain what that is to the kind of idiots like me who don't quite understand it?
Yeah.
And why is it kind of beneficial for organizations to be operating that?
Look, I think, Adrian, to start out with, I always like to start out with why these kind of new acronyms comes in, and there are so many within cyber. I think in the last 5 years, cyber realm has changed quite significantly. People went to the cloud, businesses became completely digitized. Now, as they capitalize on these new opportunities that digital business provides, that actually increases the threat landscape. So a bunch of very smart people at Gartner, they did some research, and over the past 5-6 years, and say, well, we need to move away from the traditional, let's say, vulnerability management, the normal siloed threat management, asset management, and really start looking into to optimize that through exposure. So moving away from risk and vulnerability management to exposure management. And this really just entails a different perspective. It's just really getting those core principles of cyber ready, making sure that you can lean on the data sets and leverage on some of these emerging technologies that's available to be able to manage that exposure on an ongoing basis.
Okay. And I did a little bit of research, only a little bit, but there was kind of talk around key pillars of CTEM. I believe that's the acronym that we use.
That's exactly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's CTEM.
All about the acronym. So what are those key pillars?
So I think, as with Gartner, a lot of research, sometimes a bit more ambiguous, sometimes vague. But I think to oversimplify it, there's two big domains within CTEM. It's the discovery phase, and I think maybe just to put the caveat there, the CTEM is not a product. It's a program, it's a process, a methodology that organizations needs to adopt. So they go and position this CTEM approach and say, look at two big domains. You start out with discovery, and then you move into action. Okay. If you really go break down those two phases or domains, it's the basics. It's I think on the discovery side, they start out with let's scope. Let's get to the business, understand what's valuable to the business, what are those assets. Let's move away from those traditional views of asset management, which is just the workstations and servers, and really start looking at what is valuable to the business, because everything is now digital. That actually says, okay, well, these are the key domains of assets, of digital assets, and then move on and say, okay, well, can we go and discover? Can we go and look for where those assets is? Now, a key point from the discovery phase is, and again, it also just articulates the differences between assets. Today, again, people think servers, workstations, those are part of your asset registry, but what about your code repositories within GitHub? What about your data within third parties? Or what about, let's say, your social media information? Now, not all of them are deemed equally, not all posing big risks to the business.
Sure.
But with any risk, you need to go and deploy some controls to that. So that first phase is really just taking account of where your asset landscape is. We've been looking at some of the control layers that you have in place. Do you protect them? Do you have some policies in place for them? And then once you have that view, now you need to prioritize. And this is moving into the action phase. The action phase is the hard part. With all of these digital data, assets going around. There's this plethora of more information, more data points, more bits and bytes. How do we process and prioritize that? And what CTEM really tries to do is say, let's lean on emerging technologies, let's lean on capabilities to bring in all of those data sets, but ask a different question. Are those controls surrounding those protected assets, are they working? And are they working continuously? So looking at that model is really bringing in everything into one single view, focusing down on where the exposure points is, and exposures mean what is the biggest impact to the business, and then enabling teams to actually go and say, okay, well, this is the area that I need to focus on the business to protect, instead of the traditional whack-a-mole and say, I see a threat, I see a vulnerability, and I need to respond.
Okay.
So that's CTEM in a nutshell. Happy to give you more on that.
Okay, cool. So let's talk, I guess, perhaps, is there any way, I mean, AI is like the big conversation topic out on the floor, out in the kind of the presentations. Is there any way that AI is kind of being deployed in this, in kind of automation is being deployed in CTEM? And if so, how is that being used?
Very good question. I think maybe a step and look into the CTEM methodology. And I can't talk about industry, I can only talk from my experience within Snode. When we started looking at this problem statement, and it wasn't called CTEM back in the day, it was called risk management or vulnerability management and threat management. When we started our solution, one of the biggest problems that we needed to solve is the human problem, the skill shortage one.
Yeah.
And we started looking and saying, well, what are the opportunities for us to lean on the machines, have the machines process all of these large amount of data sets to augment the human side? Where AI has really changed, and I think AI has got this broad statement these days. We've seen it all over and all that, but I think not to see how AI gets implemented, because AI is everything. It could be neural predictive analytics, it could be neural networks, it could be so much more. What I like about the big drive and what we've now seen in recent years with LLM and machine learnings is the industry is starting to respond to this new hype cycle of AI. What that allows us to do is to start increasing the processing power, increasing the innovation around these different ways of running with these data models. Now, what we have in Snode is we've been crafting away at this problem for a good 8 years now, and are leaning on this new emerging technologies to be able to process these large data sets from the CTEM model itself. So it's got to have a play. I think there's the traditional, like what we now see on ChatGPT, asking your data a different question, having more of a narrowed, focused response back. And again, that enables the teams and the already constrained cyber teams to be able to act accordingly.
Okay. And then how do people and machines work together in CTEM? I mean, there's obviously scope for a lot of this to kind of be automated, but I feel that there's probably still a space for humans in this whole process.
I think the analogy that I always like is almost like the drone operators. Okay. The drone can't be completely autonomous. There's this human element in there. There's no different than cyber. If you look at CTEM, as I mentioned, there's this large amount of data sets, maybe not as controlled as what it would be traditionally. There's data sets outside and they have controls. All these controls are very kind of chatty. There's a lot of data points to that. Now, when you bring that back into analytics and automation, the human element is going to play a key role to discern around that. Leaning on the machines to do the heavy processing, currently we're looking at anything from 6 billion records a day that we're processing to give you 1 or 2 results. The human still needs to apply that human wisdom to it and say, well, I'm discerning from this. I know the context of the business. I know what my strategy is looking like. I know how my architecture works. So based on these data sets, I can make a decision. And that's the valuable piece. So I don't think we'll ever move away from being completely autonomous. I think SOAR, or Security Orchestration Automated Response, is going to be more effective and more almost like a surgical blade with the human with the scalpel in the hand.
Okay. Yeah. And then I said I'd researched, and I'm pretending that I'm going to ask intelligent questions. But let's ask one of the stupid questions. How does CTEM help the cybersecurity team? Like, what are the benefits to them specifically?
So I think if you adopt a CTEM methodology, I think at first in that discovery phase, it's going to keep them busy accounting for all of those assets. But let's say if you move them to a more matured phase into this program, it's actually going to give them time back. It's going to give them focus back. Because now, again, we're not looking at every vulnerability. You're actually looking at the relationships between, let's say, an asset, the vulnerabilities around that asset, the threats, either internally, your internal threats, maybe overuse of credentials, privileges. So you're looking at all of those data points and allowing the cyber workers, the cyber teams, to not go and focus on these individual problem statements, but bringing everything into one single lens and say, hey, this is the one we need to focus on. So that inevitably causes more efficiency.
Sure.
That inevitably allows them to focus on the stuff that the business really need the teams to do, like moving more into, let's say, a proactive state, a proactive cyber state. And I think the methodology is designed to say, let's get those basics perfected. And those basics starts, again, with assets. So the cyber team is going to be, I think, constrained at first to account, itemize all of these things, but then start leaning on the methodology, emerging technologies, have these types of discussions to demystify these complexities. I'm sure there's going to be some time back. We've seen it in our industry quite a bit.
Okay. So you mentioned SOAR. And I've forgotten the acronym. So where does that fit into things?
So SOAR, security orchestration and automated response.
I'm going to write that down now.
Word.
Security, orchestration and response.
Exactly. Okay. So, and again, I'm going to take it back to the asset side. As I mentioned earlier on during the first phase of this program, you have some data points or data assets that's out in the world. Usually as a business, you need to go protect them with safeguards and controls. Now those controls either allow certain activities to happen or deter certain activities to happen. Where SOAR really comes in is to say, okay, well, if we analyze all of these data sets, and I do see something wrong, some malicious actor or an adversary within my environment. SOAR is a concept and it's a capability where there's a central node where it's going to almost like orchestrate either your existing security investments or tell the firewall to block or tell the endpoint to isolate this device. The stimulus or the catalyst for that decision still remains within the analytics. Which risk do you want to treat first?
Okay.
What we've done on the Snode side is exactly that, understanding this large data set and almost like looking at the key components either in the early phases of the attack chain, so that knock on the door maybe, and then look if we can deter that. That deter is happening through the technology, speaking to another piece of control or technology and reducing the risk, blocking that event from happening. And that in essence is SOAR. Now we take that back to CTEM. Again, you're analyzing your entire asset landscape, the behaviors that they have, the controls that you have, how effective those controls are. Now if there's a control deviation from the expected behavior or something slips through, SOAR is going to be a key role to actually go and deter or prevent that from happening.
Okay. So we've obviously got cloud computing has kind of mentioned 5 years ago, and that's probably that would be 2019. I think that's when Azure was kind of announced, or maybe landed here. I can't remember exactly. No, it was 2020 it came in. But probably announced then. So we've obviously had cloud computing massive growth in recent years. I think I was speaking to a couple of the other people this morning. Cloud has kind of been like great for businesses and great for that kind of operational stuff that they can expand and do all these kind of innovation and all the amazing things. But I think it's also created a whole lot of complexity for cybersecurity, because everything that used to be on premise, like you're kind of controlling it,
correct,
and now it's out there. And is Azure responsible for that? Is AWS responsible for that? Are we responsible for that? I think there's a lot of kind of uncertainty, and I guess that kind of causes possible areas of vulnerability. So given that, how's CTEM kind of evolving in that way?
It's a brilliant statement. I think from a cloud perspective, earlier on, like I said, businesses are starting to digitize and they enjoy these benefits of having this elastic environment that can scale on the demand. A lot of cloud providers could provide great technology stacks to be able to secure that. I think from a CTEM side, it's almost like urging the industry to go look at those basic principles again. Start with those. Where's your assets? Be that on-prem, be it outside, or be that in the cloud. What are the control layers around that? How do we control those? How do we prevent people from connecting that? Now, when you're looking at a cloud digital strategy, people traditionally focus on the functionality, the amazing stuff around this, and not as much on the cyber or the resilience of this environment from a cyber perspective. Where CTEM comes in and say, guys, I'm going to bring you back to those core principles. Understand if you're starting out your cloud journey, your digitalization journey, start implementing these principles. Go and discover where your asset would reside. Look at those controls to protect those assets. How do you lean on those controls and understand what they do over a period of time, but do that in a continuous manner? How do you take all of those components back together and refocus on the exposure and what's the impact to the business? So from an early age, from an early start, if you start your cloud journey, I think it's a beautiful methodology to really go and apply these principles. If you're at a later stage, then you already have some historic information around how these assets work, and it's the same adoption as any company would do. So I think CTEM plays, again, it just brings back everybody to focus down on those core principles. I think the need there, however, is to have more of these types of discussions. Industry would sometimes go and say CTEM is purely attack surface. So if I hold everything and I have a zero trust methodology and approach to my infrastructure, it's good stuff, but it's not. It is just one lens. You need to look at from the endpoint right down to the public cloud side as well.
So I'm going to throw a slight curveball. I'm trying to think who it was. Certainly the CISO of ABSA I spoke to a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
But I think someone else this morning mentioned the supply chain and like third parties. Now, the way that Manoj from ABSA kind of explained it to me kind of made a lot of sense, that like you kind of go and assess the parties that you deal with and you've got those kind of connected relationships with and your data's kind of... So how is CTEM applied to like the third-party ecosystem?
100%. So almost in the same sense as your code repositories within GitHub, no different on your third parties. You do give them assets or data items, information items, and you do usually industry and businesses traditionally said, well, I have a contract with Adrian and he needs to secure this. But now that business is also quite digital. So where CTEM plays now a role is and say, well, what are those continuous methods that I can go and deploy to make sure that my asset, that I'm accountable, I need it to align to my regulations. How do I secure that? And there's different methodologies that they apply. That yes, it starts with the governance and the policy and the legalities on that. But I think that traditional right to audit has changed to continuously assess. Where I have assets within a third party, what are those data points that I can lean on today? Some good example there is sometimes your control layer on the third party is not as strong, but you can look at elsewhere. You can look at the dark web or data leak sites or forums, and maybe your information filtered through the third party to the dark web. So there's different angles that you can look at the statement, but now I've seen that continuously assessment is moving on to the third and even the fourth party to be able to assess those data assets there. So big need, CTEM plays a key role there. Again, from that scoping part is where is my assets? Is it sitting with Adrian as a third party? Is it sitting in my control? And if it's in my control or in the third party, how do I lean on those data points around that asset?
Okay. So we've talked around, I mean, the initial kind of discovery phase is quite intensive for the cyber team. But what are some of the other challenges that you'd face when you put in a CTEM program in place? And how would you what's the best practice to do it successfully?
I think best practices is following the methodology, again, starting with assets, to almost like understand what that value of that asset is to the business. I always say when I'm, let's say in the financial institutions, you would look at the transactional environment, your cardholder environment. So everything that in between there is going to be quite critical. Because when that goes down, the business is affected. So some of those challenges is just in that scoping part is to deem what is important. If you talk to IT people, they would say everything is important because they get the mandate to make it function. If you're talking to cyber, it's like, hey, well, you know what, that transactional environment is the most important. But it needs to be a business discussion. I think the world has moved beyond from cyber being an IT risk, it's now moving into a business risk. And these are some of the topics that we need to discuss in the board level as well. And say, what is the key points of exposure? Yes, I have the siloed approach around vulnerability management, asset management, threat management, but what are we doing from an exposure? What are those key items that could expose me as a business? And then saying that and saying, well, that's the central point. And that's the discussion the cyber guys needs to have, that's the discussion that the cyber team needs to have, but ultimately bringing that discussion up front from the board level, having that top-down approach. Looking then downwards and saying, well, when that you have that asset landscape or that registry and you understand the control layers, how do I lean on technologies and capabilities out there to be able to process these things? And then structure your team to that. There's a big reform on the policy layer as well, where, you know what, you need to patch something within 25 hours if it's deemed critical. It's impossible if you have 100,000 patches missing.
Yeah.
So how do you prioritize it on the key patch, on the key response, on the key asset that could reduce that risk for you as a business?
Okay. All right, cool. So then my final question, I don't know if you remember Jerry Springer, used to have his closing thoughts.
There we go.
I'm going to give you that opportunity and turn to camera, sitting there. But what are your kind of closing thoughts? Any kind of last things that you want to leave with us about CTEM or what Snode's doing in that area?
Thank you, Adrian. Yeah, I think if you go out into this booth today, you'll see this big statement, Defenders One. And I think where that started is when we're looking at the industry here and some of the delegates here and the talks, we started realizing that we're all fighting that age-old battle between good and evil. We're all on the same team at the end of the day. Where the Defenders One concept comes is really, and it's also embedded within our technology, where we're not displacing, but we want to collaborate. And I think that's a big change within industry that we need to adapt. Our technology stack, our solution is meant to bring those partners, bring those, let's say, co-defenders with us, and process that as one united front or formidable force against cyber defense. And I want to maybe add, and I think the key players within that space is the likes of ITWeb and yourselves, because this is bringing those collaboration together.
Yeah.
I think collaboration changes into partnership, and that just strengthens our defenses. So thank you for you and the team. Really appreciate it for the opportunity.
Cool. Well, Dwain, that's been great. Thank you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
That's been Dwain Muller, Chief Operating Officer of Snode Technologies.